I always look for the second year to be the toughest year because you've given all the coordinators and everybody chances to see your weaknesses and your strengths. What do you think about that?
I think the kid is a transitional talent. I think he's poised beyond his years. He showed that at Arizona. He showed it at LSU. And he certainly showed it last year. I thought, when you bring in Kingsbury and, all the things lined up there. And it's so rare that this happens. And, let's be frank. It was, in my mind, the Washington organization, whether it was the Redskins or, the Commanders, there was always kind of a, particularly with the Redskins organization, it was a model franchise, coaching staff, football team, fan base. There was a lot to be excited about every year. And slowly but surely that got chipped away at. And for a new owner to come in, a new GM to come in, new front office, new head coach, to be fortunate enough to be picking in the top two. And, I don't think if, let's say, Washington had the number one pick last year, I don't think they would have made any choice but the choice they made. I think Adam Peters loved Jayden Daniels, and I certainly believe your head coach loved him too, and could appreciate the issues that he presents on a down in, down out basis, both as a passer, a runner, Kingsbury's ability to be diverse offensively, tempo changes, going forward on fourth down, the kind of plays that he made at end of games, last 30 seconds, overtime. He's special. You win 2 playoff games, one in Detroit now versus Detroit. Detroit was decimated on defense, but to go there on the road in a really, really great environment in Detroit where they're excited like they are in Washington right now, I think bodes well for him. And I don't think the second year will be a challenge for him. Certainly, listen, playing quarterback in the NFL is not easy, but are you better in the offensive line? Potentially, yes. Are you better at receiver? Potentially, yes. Are you going to be better on defense, particularly in the run game and maybe as a pressure team? Yeah, I think you're going to be. So you've made improvements, you've added pieces, and this kid has a shot at not just being the best quarterback in the division. And that's saying something when you've got the kid in Philadelphia who just seems to play big in the biggest of games. And, that's certainly true, and Philadelphia is loaded. But I think, Washington wouldn't trade this. Who would you trade this kid for?
Nobody.
Right.
Well, if we're being, I agree with you. That being said, there are guys out there, Mahomes, there's the guy in Cincinnati, there's the guy in Buffalo, there's some, I think we're probably deeper in terms of quality quarterbacks than we've probably ever been. I think when you and I played, it was top heavy where there was 3-4 guys and that's it. I think you can make a case for a lot of guys that are really, really quality quarterbacks, and we throw the ball more than ever. We're in sub packages 75% of the time, and that's totally foreign for you and me. We're a team. Would you typically how many downs a game would you have to play the run? Probably 40 downs. Mm-hmm. Now it's 20, 22.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
NFC East just a little bit. You talked about the Philadelphia Eagles coming off the Super Bowl. You look at Dallas. Dak is coming back from that injury. And then up in New York, you've got Russell Wilson now. Could you kind of talk about just the NFC East, how you see that Commanders stacking up with them? Who sets themselves apart now that you've got moving parts in Dallas with that new quarterback coach, and then Russell Wilson heads up to the New York Giants?
I think the Giants are a team that's going to have to play a certain style. I don't think it's necessarily the style that the head coach slash coordinator wants to play, but they've got a great wide receiver. They've got a quarterback who can manage the game. They drafted a young quarterback, and that whether that evolves over training camp and he kind of shows them something that would lend to them wanting to speed up the process. I wouldn't be surprised if he's playing mid-season, but Russell certainly is a stable guy, and I think at this point in his career, he's not as dynamic physically. I think where New York's probably going to make the biggest jump will be, I think their defensive front is really good, has a shot at being really good. They're young to a certain extent, and that, you've always got to have kind of a lead guy in the room, and they have that at the defensive tackle position. But I think that team is year two away. Philadelphia is loaded. You talk about owner, GM, offensive line, wide receivers, running back, defensive front, linebacker, secondary, defensive coordinator. It's a lot to deal with. That being said, your quarterback is special, and he's shown the ability, and we saw it versus Philadelphia late in games. When the up tempo, no huddle, and you're dictating terms to a certain extent in terms of personnel and what coverages you can play, and is the front gassed a bit, because when you go that kind of up tempo, Tony, and if you don't get your defensive front rotating in today's game, and it's so fascinating, and I don't want to sound like Clint Eastwood in Gran Torino and yelling, "Get off my lawn," but when I played, I never left. I never left the field.
Exactly.
So you played 80 snaps, whether that was up tempo, no huddle, it was running game, it was passing game, short yardage, goal line, whatever it was, you never left the field. You start to kind of dictate terms when you've got a young quarterback who's used to going no huddle, who's used to going up tempo, who can kind of dictate terms in terms of you've got to keep the same package on the field. You're limited in the variety of coverages and defenses you can play, and you're wearing a group out as the game goes on. And that's something your guy can really do well, and he showed that last year.
Well, let me ask you this, Howard. You were a high draft choice. You were an outstanding player. You're a Hall of Fame player. What did you think when Washington had 4 defensive linemen with first-round draft choices, and they started to clean out the kitchen before the food was through cooking? Talk to me.
Okay, you're going to have to spell that out for me a little better. You missed me somewhere between, and I'm going to get over here because.
Hey, Howard, he's trying to stay a little hip.
I didn't get it.
Old people do that. In other words, they got rid of those 2 of their top defensive linemen, we thought. And you know yourself, anytime you can have 4 number 1s on the front line, you want to keep them together.
Who are we talking about?
Washington.
John Allen.
Yeah. Well, listen, I trust the head coach, Dan Quinn, a lot. I really like Dan Quinn, and Adam Peters is a guy that I think has a real feel for what's going to work, and certainly I don't think any decisions are going to be made in terms of personnel. Let's be frank. The head coach is a defensive coach, and his background is his background. It's Seattle, it's Dallas, it's he's been impacted by a number of people, but I think his philosophy and his approach to what he wants, I'm sure, is very clear in those meetings when they're deciding who to let go, who not to let go. And certainly when you're talking about letting go of young, talented defensive tackles or defensive ends, you and I are kind of left scratching our heads, but I'm sure there's a method to the madness.
Hey, Howie, staying on the defense, since you and Tony love that side of the ball, Commanders, I always talk about building the team in the trenches, whether it's the offensive line. In the last 2 years, they drafted 2 offensive linemen, first rounders. Then the defense in free agency, they beefed up that in the secondary and up front a little bit, but they did not get that pass rusher that they wanted yet. With Joe Witt headed into his second year, how do you see that defense for the Commanders in Lattimore? They got late in the season from the New Orleans Saints. He should be 100% doing training, doing the OTAs this year. Talked to him a little bit. He said he's 100%. Then they brought some of the veterans on in the secondaries, but still not that pass rusher. You talked about Philadelphia, and they are loaded across the board. They've got better in their draft this year. How does the Commanders stack up defensively with the Eagles headed into 2025?
Well, I think it's going to be schematic. You have to, and this is not something. Tony and I were fortunate enough to play with some pretty good groups, and I think Greg Townsend, Sean Jones, Lyle Alzado, Bill Piquel, that's 400 sacks right there, in between the whole group. When you can do that, independent of trying to manufacture pressure, it makes you so much more diverse on the back end. That being said, I don't think you have that guy yet. I think the focal point was to try to, you're adding some veterans. You know what you're going to get. Listen, last year, great example. 3-4 guys that were 1-year guys that, you know what you're going to get. He had some experience with, Dan Quinn had some experience with some of them. And some of it, like you're going to, Bobby Wagner is a force multiplier, both from as a player and as a leader in the locker room, and setting the kind of, this is the identity of who we are, and this is the standard. Anything short of that is unacceptable. And if it doesn't head in that direction, then you'll have to deal with me individually. And he's one of those guys. That being said, I think what you looked at was, say, how do we better prepare our quarterback to be successful in year 2, as you talked about, Tony. I think the offensive line was a big key. Is Debo? The Debo, and I've covered him quite a bit when he was with San Francisco, and at his best, he's a problem. He's a problem across the middle. He's a problem. He's a great complementary piece to your number one, and your number one is in the middle of a contract thing. Hopefully that gets worked out. But I think the philosophy was, we're going to fill in the blanks on defense with 1-year, 2-year guys, and we're going to try to improve the offensive line, solidify it for the young kid at quarterback. We're going to try to add pieces at wide receiver, and we're going to try to be better overall offensively, and that helps your defense and in many ways dictates terms.
You see, that's the way I look at it, for the simple aspect that I feel like the defense will always be better if the offense is good.
Oh, in other words, so much easier to play with a lead.
Right. Yeah. You don't have to be.
Okay, Tony, if the defense could stop the run, maybe the offense could.
Oh, wait, now you don't have to get particular. They got to the playoffs.
I knew Donna was going to bring up that 30th ranked defense.
I had to. Howie.
They're waiting to throw him up under the bus anyway. But as I take a look at this team, I think, as I said, I still look at coordinators will stop them a little bit. That running game had to get stronger. That's the one part I was kind of disappointed in. It looks as if after a few injuries and everything, they didn't have a true number one. They had 3 guys that could get it done, but they need that one horse. And then defensively, you need that guy that he may not always get there, like Howie. He may not have gotten there to every sack he could have gotten, but he puts so much pressure. See, it's about the whole game.
And Tony, I agree. One thing Al Davis used to say to me all the time was, don't worry about the numbers. Just be disruptive. Can you be disruptive? And that's really, I think, what we're talking about. And, guys like Myles Garrett and, you can fill in the blank. They're just so disruptive. The guy out with the Raiders, Crosby, he's a problem. And if you don't have one of those guys during the week, where on Monday morning, the first problem that offensive coordinator for the opposing team has is, how are we going to deal with him?
Mm-hmm.
Because if we don't deal with him, listen, there were plays I remember, I forget where it was. I'm in a 3 technique and I come off the ball and nobody blocks me.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it was a screw up, but in my head, I'm thinking sucker, trap,
there you go.
I'm looking around like I can't be unblocked. So that guy's so used to being blocked by, you've got Y on, Y off, Y motion. The guard shows you run outside. The tight end comes and ear holes you on the inside. You get a slide your way, or you get the tackle guard combination right away. You get the rare kind of running back inside chip on a defensive tackle, which they don't do a lot. They've got to do it versus the kid in Philadelphia. The kid in Philadelphia, if there's a reason why he went where he went in the draft. And that's his issue, and he has to own that, and and I'm sure he has, and it looks like he has. I think that the significant thing was, and I'm sure you felt this way when you played with your group, when you bring a guy like that who maybe has made some choices that weren't good choices. When he walks into your room, that room is responsible for him. Mm-hmm. And he's got to be held accountable in the room. Now, his talent is immense. His play is off the charts. Can he continue to make good choices and realize his full potential? I hope he does, because I love watching him. I hope he does, but again, Tony, it's on the room, and it's on the defensive coordinator, it's on the defensive line coach, but at the bottom line is it's on the kid. Is he willing to do that? And when you have a guy like that, he's special. And I rarely do you see a guy that he makes people in today's game, which is bigger, stronger, faster, he makes them look average. It's pretty amazing. It's a lot of fun to watch.
Since you were talking about around the league a little bit, who are your top teams headed into 2025? Who stands out among the group in the early assessment?
Philadelphia, right off the bat. I love the coach for the Rams. I love what they do there. I like the GM. I like their talent. I think it's interesting because you guys are worried about year 2 and the quarterback and all that. I just think that group is going to be good, and I think the Commanders' future. Now, you talked about him running the football, and I agree with you, Tony. And I that's a concern. But I think early in the season, he was just running just to run.
Mm-hmm.
And what he does now is he picks his spots. For example, if he's going to see man, and you're in 4 wide receivers, and everyone has their back turned to you, and you've got 3 or 4, let's say 3 or 4 rushers, and maybe you have a spy who's floating. If there's an open lane, like the Philadelphia game, late in the game, pulls the ball down twice, runs for 20 yards, and puts them in position to have a chance to win. those are the kinds of runs I saw more of at the end of the year, where they're smarter runs, where he's not running to impact. You know, you can't. One, I think he's come back a little bit bigger from what I've heard. He's put on some muscle, which is great. That was my one concern with him. My one concern with him was, God, he's about $195. You know, I mean, he's, you know, maybe he's 205 when he's fully watered up, and you know, but beyond that, I look for him to get a little bit bigger, and I think he has. I think he's a special kid, and I think he's going to be a guy that is going to change the face of that division, and particularly in the NFC, I think.